Welcome in out there, everyone. Tonight's topic is a personal favorite and one that does carry a lot of weight, not just in terms of our seventh grade class this year, but also looking at AP Government and AP US History. So if you are an AP Government student or an AP US History student watching, I hope you guys will find this important and find this to be fascinating in a way that should help you understand better about the way that the United States Constitution was put together. Now, we've been going over in class the strengths, the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. But ultimately, there was one example that best demonstrated why the Articles of the Confederation government was not sturdy enough to remain as the United States' government. In the middle of the 1780s, one of the biggest problems the AOC could not handle is taxes. The Articles did not have the power. The Congress did not have the power to tax people. That fell to the states. Consequently, when it came time to paying soldiers who had fought in the war, the Articles of Confederation Congress could not pay those soldiers back. Numerous soldiers, as a result, and not just soldiers, but a lot of people within the United States fell into massive debt, and there was this huge economic recession that occurred. The economy was stalling, and it started to go backwards. Because people couldn't pay back their taxes that the states were charging, people were falling into huge amounts of debt. And debt equals financial problems. And if you can't pay your debt, states started locking people up in jail. Now, Massachusetts, and this shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone, Massachusetts is where much of the controversy surrounding the post-war tax problem and the post-war debt, soldiers in Massachusetts started to become arrested in large numbers because they couldn't pay back their taxes. They couldn't pay back the debts they owed to the states, so they were arrested. And by the way, the same thing happens today. If you don't pay your taxes, you can go to jail. So states were locking up Revolutionary War soldiers. And some of these people were big heroes, but now they couldn't even pay back the money they owned on their homes or their land or their farms, whatever. So they're going to jail. Now, one former Revolutionary War captain named Daniel Shays, S-H-A-Y-S, Daniel Shays organized a huge protest movement around the policies of jailing Revolutionary War soldiers who couldn't pay back their taxes. Again, this included more than just Revolutionary War soldiers. However, Shays led a rebellion known as Shays Rebellion, and this rebellion actually turned quite violent. Shays got a lot of the former soldiers. They tried to break into the Massachusetts State Arsenal where they kept a lot of guns. And ultimately, troops had to be called in to put Shays' rebellion down. But here's the important part about Shays' rebellion. Number one, not only did it happen in Massachusetts where so much of the Revolutionary War protest era had been, but also it spread to other states. So this was not just a regional problem. This was all throughout the United States. This problem of people not being able to pay back their debts really cost a lot of people, momentum built as a result of that into this sort of rebellion. So Shays' rebellion was not just in Massachusetts. It was also in other states. The second thing, though, is that Shays' rebellion ultimately showcased the biggest weakness of all, and that's that the Articles of Confederation government could not adequately manage the economy. So with Shays' rebellion occurring in 1786, members of the Continental Congress, former members of the Continental Congress, members of the Articles of Confederation Congress, members of the states began to meet on the side, and they met in Annapolis, Maryland. Annapolis, by the way, is the capital of Maryland. And they met in Annapolis in what became known as the Annapolis Convention. And at the Annapolis Convention, basically what was determined is that the Articles of Confederation needs to be revised. So plans were set at Annapolis, the Annapolis Convention, for more delegates to arrive in 1787, the summer of 1787 in Philadelphia, where revisions to the Articles of Confederation would be written. So that's the plan. All right, the Articles are failing. Shays Rebellion has exposed a huge weakness in the government. We need a new government, perhaps, but let's see what we can do with this AOC business. So the initial plan in May of 1787 was to go to Philadelphia and rewrite the Articles of Confederation. Well, that didn't quite happen. Why not? Because the Articles of Confederation would be scrapped altogether, no more articles, bring on a brand new government, and that brand new government is going to come to us in the form of the United States Constitution. So that's sort of the genesis of the United States Constitution. People met, delegates met in Philadelphia in 1787 to rewrite the Articles, but what ended up happening was a whole new government. Now, we have, without a doubt, one of the most intensive, difficult topics of all year we're going to spend. And I'm going to allocate a lot of time to this because I really believe for you guys in 7th grade to better know your government and Constitution is one of the most important skills for us to note. And I'm going to say this now, and I'll reinforce this all throughout our unit on the Constitution. The Constitution has been called a lot of things. And one of the terms I like the most is a bundle of compromises. The Constitution was not an easy task. Writing a government came with a whole lot of headache and a whole lot of thought and a whole lot of enlightenment principles. And we're going to be looking very closely at a number of constitutional compromises that really go into what I have here. Why not use props when we can? Here's our constitutions, our pocket constitutions. Now, in those pocket constitutions, there are a number of compromises, and these compromises are beautiful. They're wonderful. Some are controversial. Some are like, man, why did they do that? Why, oh my gosh, they could have done so much more, like on slavery perhaps. And others are like, wow, how could they tell that 200-something years later, this was all going to work out? And we're going to really break down these compromises one by one. And the first compromise that we're going to do, I'm going to set it up, but I'm going to turn it over to our favorite TA here, Christian Lee. And that's going to be the idea of representation. One of the biggest debates within the Constitutional Convention in 1787 was what to do about representation. In other words, how many people for the Congress would each state get? Because one of the things about the Articles of Confederation that was a problem is that each state only received one representative to vote. So one vote per state. And that's kind of, that didn't sit well with certain states. And one of the first proposals that's going to come about on representation, how many people each state would get to Congress, came from James Madison, who's from Virginia. And so Christian is going to talk to you about the three compromises that came about as a result of representation. Please make sure to take notes, and please make sure to have questions ready to go in class tomorrow, because I want to make sure that before we move on to other compromises, we really lock down this compromise on representation, because that's the compromise that will drive the rest of all the other compromises. So, Christian, take it away.
What's going on, 7th grade? I hope you guys are having a great evening, or at least I'm assuming that you guys will be watching this in your evening time, but I'll try not to take too long. But today we have a special topic of interest regarding how states are represented within Congress when our founding fathers are writing or drafting the Constitution. So obviously the founding fathers split the government into three branches: legislative, judicial, and the executive branch. But today we'll be focusing on the legislative branch and how each state got representation within the Congress that was eventually created. And so we had three plans that came into being during this time as ideas or proposals to help settle this conflict. The first was James Madison's Virginia Plan. Now, James Madison's Virginia Plan was based solely on state population, which left things very unfair to smaller states, such as Delaware, to name one, or Rhode Island, so to speak. Whereas the Virginia Plan favored states with larger populations like Pennsylvania and, well, Virginia. And so the New Jersey Plan, on the other hand, was the opposing force in this debate. And the New Jersey Plan said that every state would get an equal number of representatives within the Congress. regardless of the population. Now, there was a lot of back and forth argument about this, and eventually there came what was known as the Great Compromise, or known as the Connecticut Plan, which was better known as the Great Compromise. Excuse me for the slip up there. And so the Great Compromise said that all the states would get representation within Congress based on population and based upon just equality. And so that's why we have the bicameral legislature now, which is within the Congress, we have the Senate and the House of Representatives. Nowadays, we have 535 total members of Congress, 435 of which are in the House of Representatives based upon states' populations, and 100 of which are in the Senate, which is equal among all states. So every state gets 2. 50 states, do the math, 2 from each state, and we get 100 senators. So there you have it, 7th graders. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Christian, former APUSH Nation hero and 7th grade TA. I appreciate your breakdown on the Virginia, New Jersey, and ultimately the Connecticut plan for representation. Where are we going to go from here? Well, we'll continue tomorrow in class talking about more compromises in the Constitution. But let us not digress too much on compromises before we realize that the Constitution, one of the beauties of the Constitution that we're going to break down, is how it does include so much of the Enlightenment. And, Christian mentioned this, and I'm going to reinforce this tomorrow. While we're focusing right now on just the Congress, the breakdown of Congress, and that was one of the first issues that the Madison and all the other delegates at the Constitutional Convention, they wanted to solve the legislative body. They wanted to figure out Congress. The next big hurdles are going to be the executive branch and eventually the judicial branch. So we're going to take a look at what those terms mean over the next couple of days. To reiterate, let's not forget the importance of bringing our constitutions. Bring your constitutions every day. Please have those. We're going to do a lot with the Constitution tomorrow and the rest of the week. So be ready for that. I'm going to leave you guys off with just sort of a teaser for tomorrow. When we first come in class tomorrow, we're going to do a nice little activity we'll do them on your whiteboards. So everyone just grab a whiteboard when you come into class tomorrow, please. It's not a team trivia activity. We'll have something built in later in the class this week. Everyone get a whiteboard. We're going to do a little writing activity, and that will tie back to the Constitution. So looking forward to that with you guys. I get very excited talking about the Constitution, and I can't wait to spread more awareness about the Constitution with you. So have a great evening, 7th graders. Thanks again, Christian. And as always, everyone, the past shapes the future. Have a good night.